Tonight, it is all about the law. A former federal prosecutor joins us to take a look at the latest developments regarding Trump and the Mueller probe, and also Paul Manafort, who could be trying to reach a plea deal ahead of his second trial. Then the confirmation hearings are done, but still many open questions about Judge Brett Kavanaugh on key issues. Can Democrats still block him, or at this point, is he a shoo-in? Also, a controversial police shooting in Dallas when an off-duty officer kills someone in their own apartment. We'll explain whether or not police get different treatment than civilians. Evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening. Now, just like we do nearly every Wednesday, we start with the very latest when it comes to the Russia probe. And tonight, we have an interesting voice weighing in on presidential power. That voice belongs to none other than Ken Starr. He, of course, the former special prosecutor who investigated Bill Clinton 20 years ago. Here he is.
I think a president can be indicted, but that is not the position of the Justice Department traditionally, going back to the Nixon-Ford era and continuing through President Clinton's tenure. No one is above the law, and so in my judgment, the president can, in fact, be indicted. But it cannot happen, as I see it, under Justice Department policy, as and that's enforceable on Bob Mueller.
And we'll discuss that issue in a moment, but while Bob Mueller continues his probe, Paul Manafort, remember him, he's getting ready for round two. His second trial is set to start next week, but the Washington Post is reporting that Trump's former campaign chairman is in talks for a possible plea deal. It is unclear whether that could result in Manafort cooperating with Mueller. And that is on the heels of Manafort's conviction on 8 federal charges just last month. Both cases stem from his work in the Ukraine and millions of dollars that he made as a result. He's already been convicted of tax fraud and bank fraud. His next case is for witness tampering, money laundering, conspiracy against the U.S., and failing to register as a foreign agent. Then there's Donald Trump Jr. The president's oldest son just gave an interview with ABC News, and he had this to say.
Your father has denied reports that he's worried that you might be in legal jeopardy because of the Mueller investigation. But are you scared that you could go to jail?
I'm not, because I know what I did, and I'm not worried about any of that. You know, that doesn't mean they won't try to create something. I mean, we've seen that happen with everything. But, you know, again, I'm not.
But some say that Mueller has been successful. He has an indictment of Manafort. He has a plea deal from Cohen. He has Papadopoulos sentenced. You know, he's got a litany of close associates of your father's under investigation.
All for things that happened way before they were ever part of any campaign. So if they get Manafort on a 2006 tax charge, you know, again, I understand that they are trying to get my father, and they'll do anything they can to get that.
Well, helping us now separate fact from fiction, former federal prosecutor Barrett Berger, she now director of the Center for Advancement of Public Integrity at Columbia Law School. Always good talking to you. Well, let me first start with what we just heard from Don Jr. And the premise, certainly that we see in tweet storms and that he's advancing, is this is a gotcha campaign that Mueller's running here. And this isn't for anything to do with a campaign, collusion, obstruction. This is, if you look hard enough, you'll find something on anybody. It seems that is completely absolving everything that we've seen with Mr. Cohen and so many others. This is all born out of the investigation where this originated from, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, this is sort of the mantra of, you know, the Donald Trump and, you know, his associates right now, is the power of repetition. If we keep calling it a witch hunt, if we keep saying there's nothing there, but they're just trying to pin stuff on us, then we will at least win in the court of public opinion, even if we're not winning in courts of law. But it's important to remember that in the actual courts that matter, in the courts of law, they are not winning. The special counsel's office is winning. Time and time again, they have had indictments, they've had guilty pleas, they have had trial convictions now. So I think it's, you know, whether they want to keep saying, oh, it's all a witch hunt, there's, you know, nothing, no substance here, you know, they can say it, but it's not being borne out in court.
Guy we just heard from, a lot of your former colleagues and folks that have been following this investigation say the next guy that might be in the crosshairs is Donald Trump Jr. What could his potential exposure be, and should he be worried?
I think he should be incredibly worried. I think, the Trump Tower meeting that we've all heard so much about, which, there's been a real shifting story about, first it was just about adoptions, and then the story changed, and okay, it was actually about getting dirt on, an opponent. This is something that is completely right in the center of the special counsel's investigation. This is definitely something that they're looking at. And Donald Trump Jr. was at the meeting. He's certainly somebody that is right in the crosshairs of this investigation. So I think he's probably right to be a little bit concerned at this point, because who knows how much evidence the special counsel has at this point. We haven't really seen all of that borne out yet. So I think Donald Trump Jr. should be afraid.
You know what's interesting, Barrett, is a lot of folks say, don't follow all the shiny objects, follow the money. Because, and there's been a decent amount of reporting on some of this weekend, if you follow where Donald Trump singles out particular actors that he finds, including of the 19 prosecutors that were part of the Mueller team and the investigators, the ones that were involved in expertise in money laundering, or also those that follow the ties between the Russian dollars over the years, from as a private citizen Donald Trump and helping him when he was staving off bankruptcy, and in the intervening years. Is that going to be a big focus, you think, also of Mueller when we finally see the report, what the connection was between the oligarchs or the Russian dollars and Trump going back to the casino days to present day, and what they got for that investment?
Yeah, it is unprecedented, first of all, for a sitting president to really be singling out, senior Department of Justice officials, career prosecutors, for the work they're doing by name, and saying in tweets, why is Orr still have a job? I mean, it's important to remember, Orr is somebody that has spent his life working on Russian organized crime.
Yep.
And there's been reporting that Trump was about to declassify instances about reporting about what Orr was doing. This is incredibly dangerous. I mean, to the extent—
Imagine the precedent that would set.
Imagine the precedent that would set, exactly. And, the reporting that, Orr's investigative activities, this would probably include source meetings that he had, tips that he had about Russian oligarchs and how they were trying to funnel money, launder money into the United States. This is terrifying to the idea that this could then, be made public for everyone, including for the Russians to see.
Now, I'm not asking you to try and put him on the couch as a patient here, but is your history in your time as a prosecutor, when a person of interest continues to be particularly upset when Deutsche Bank came up apparently in certain conversations, who have had instances where money laundering had been accused in the past, but they were, let's say, a pass-through bank here, at least with some of the dollars of the Russians and Trump, and some questionable even real estate transactions, a property in Florida being one of them, et cetera. And that's what triggers apparently the biggest amount of anger. That's certainly not off limits for the Mueller probe. He can go wherever he wants, really, but that seems to be integral if you're trying to find collusion or if there was obstruction, right?
Right, and it's, financial records don't lie. I mean, again, there was reporting that over the summer that, there was subpoenas that were sent to Deutsche Bank and that then enraged the president. Well, again, as we saw in the Manafort trial, financial records are some of the most damaging material that a prosecutor can present. There's no wiggle room. It's black and white. So to the extent that there were, shady financial dealings, and remember, Deutsche Bank and Trump go back decades now. So they have this long history, and it was a tumultuous history. I think Trump sued Deutsche Bank at one point and owed millions and millions of dollars back in unpaid loans. So you can understand why the idea of the special counsel's office looking into that relationship and serving subpoenas on Deutsche Bank, you can understand why that would be scary.
We heard from Ken Starr, of all people, saying a president can be indicted. And I saw you nodding when he acknowledged that's not, though, in keeping with the current Justice Department policy. What about that? Because the public says, wait a minute, somebody commits a crime, whether they're president or not, they broke the law. Does the law apply to them? And I've heard three different versions. No, it doesn't really, because they're treated different as a president. Yes, it can. Or wait until they're out of office, and then you can pursue criminal charges, if you will. But the only exposure a sitting president could have is politically, whether it were to rise to impeachment. Where do you think the line starts and stops?
This is an open question. It will be interesting to see if this, does come up, this will certainly be something my guess is that would actually go to the Supreme Court. And I think you're right. I think we've seen it in different contexts. I think there are probably some categories where, a sitting president is not above the law. There have to be some categories where, he or she is just as, has to answer and just as accountable as the rest of us. Historically, there have been categories where sitting presidents have been made to answer the law, whether it's to, a written subpoena or in a civil case. So there are certain circumstances where presidents have been held to,
because
have
it
to
came
answer
up, but
legal
it was
process.
never resolved with the Nixon case here.
Exactly. And they asked, Brett Kavanaugh about that in his hearings.
Finally, Manafort, we reported that they're in conversations with the prosecutors. Try and read between the lines, and I know it's dangerous here, but is that just because he's already looking at these charges and it's strictly about the second trial, or because he could be looking at 30 years and for a 70-year-old, basically a life sentence, forget about even the second trial, he's now ready to play ball? What do you think is going on behind the scenes?
Again, if I had to guess, I would think that he is looking for what we would call sort of a straight guilty plea, if this is something at all, as opposed to a cooperation agreement. A guilty plea that he would take, he could get benefits for that. He could get some time off of his sentence just for acceptance of responsibility. That's not him having to provide information. That's just, if you take responsibility for your crimes, you usually get a discount in your sentence. He could get some benefit for forfeiture for how much money he has to pay back. And certainly there'd be a benefit for the special counsel's office, right? They wouldn't have to go through the trouble of a second trial. They wouldn't necessarily have to call Gates again. But they also would have that admission, which I think would be important for the special counsel's office. So they would get a benefit too. I think it's unlikely that he's meeting with them to go forward on a cooperation agreement. I feel like that ship has probably sailed. And you have to remember, he may still be holding out hope for a pardon, which, to the extent that he cooperates, is probably off the table.
Last one before I let you go, since I already asked you to go on a limb and saying what's going behind closed doors. Finally, if you were a betting woman, does Trump ever sit down and answer questions written or in person? Is this just a whole song and dance? He's never going to do it because, as Dowd apparently said, if you believe Woodward, he's a walking perjury.
I think it would be incredibly unlikely that he would have a face-to-face interview. Maybe he gives some sort of written answers because those could be carefully scripted, but I'd put the odds very low that he sits down for a face-to-face.
As always, Brett, great job. Thank you so much. All right, coming up next, everybody, Brett Kavanaugh questioned for 4 days during Supreme Court confirmation hearings last week, but there are still a ton of open questions about how he would rule on major issues. Our legal panel will join us to take a closer look at Mr. Kavanaugh.